Did you know that they're still making Game Boy games? Some of you probably don't even know what a Game Boy is, but if you have a Nintendo Switch, the truth is you can already play some Game Boy games right now. And if you remember my video where I played Zelda's Awakening on the Nintendo Switch Lite, well actually that was a remake of, you guessed it, the Game Boy game. Well, imagine my surprise when Megacat Studios offered to send me a review unit of an actual physical Game Boy cartridge for KUDZU, a brand new game in 2023. Let me repeat that. A game for a handheld that released over 30 years ago. I was immediately ready to say yes, but it being a physical game cartridge, I had to check whether my old Game Boy still even worked. Fortunately it did, and the Game Boy we'll be using today is the Game Boy Lite, a special version of the Game Boy Pocket that only released in Japan. Originally I was going to show you the game on my original Game Boy, but the screen on the original is nowhere near as sharp. Full disclaimer, Megacat Studios did send me this advanced review unit just for the purposes of making this video, but I've not been instructed to say anything specific, and of course, all opinions are my own. Now, this may be a game for a handheld that's 3 decades old, but that doesn't mean they can work on it for free. You can get the ROM file to play on an emulator for $20 on Kickstarter, or pay $45 and get the physical cartridge for that truly retro experience. Speaking of the experience, let's talk about the game itself. The main draw of KUDZU is that it's a brand new adventure for people who just wish they could get more action in the style of the original Zelda Link's Awakening. And on that front, KUDZU delivers exactly that. A physical Game Boy game where you wake up in a room, have a little chat with someone in your house, go outside, find a sword, and start your adventure. Graphically, it's exactly as you'd expect. There are 4 colors: gray, more gray, slightly less gray, and mostly not gray. Musically, it's as simple as you'd expect. 2 pulse wave generators, 1 PCM channel, and noise. You want hi-hats, snare, and crash cymbals? Ha! You get short noise, long noise, and a few things in between. Jokes aside though, this is a brilliant experience. There's a lot to be said for a game that targets a retro console as its primary platform. The game's creator, Chris Totten, is also an author and college professor, and it's pretty clear that he understands that constraints can lead to inspiration, creativity, and a whole world of retro goodness that had never been fully realized even when the Game Boy was current gen. Well, that's what I'd like to say, but the more you play KUDZU, the more you start to realize that although it's an awesome throwback to Link's Awakening, one of the greatest and most well-loved games of all time, this is not Zelda. It's something else. But more on that later. Gameplay-wise, you've got the standard Zelda experience. You wield a sword which you can use to attack pretty much anything that moves. In true Zelda style, you use it right-handed when facing east and left-handed when you're facing west. Ambidextrous heroes are the best. But in addition to sword swinging, you'll also be solving puzzles and remembering important locations on the map. Pressing the select button will bring up your map after you've found it, but it doesn't tell you where you are. I think you have to unlock that feature later in the game. When it comes to the puzzles, the first one you'll encounter will end up being quite important because it's the main KUDZU mechanic. If you destroy these plants too quickly, then you miss out on their special ability to seed nearby and grow new vines, which is often how you unlock doors to get to the next room. And although I didn't have time to run through the entire game, I think I can give you a general idea of what awaits you in KUDZU. First of all, just look at the title. What the heck is KUDZU? You don't know. Nobody knows. Until you look it up, there's really no way that you would have known that it's the Japanese word for Pueraria montana, also known as Japanese arrowroot, a group of perennial vines native to East and Southeast Asia that climb over plants and trees, killing them. Are you bored? Wait, it gets better. The main character is an ugly man called Max who wears sunglasses indoors and lives in a polo shirt and sandals. Not excited yet? Your adventure begins when you discover that Zoen, a master gardener, if such a thing even exists, has gone missing. Now you're supposed to care that he's gone missing, but you actually haven't met him yet in the game. And of course, his character design is an ugly man who wears sunglasses indoors and lives in a shirt and most probably wears sandals. Now jokes aside, you can make an interesting story even if the characters aren't exactly elves living in the Kokiri forest, about to venture through a dungeon and a possessed tree that can speak. But KUDZU makes very little effort to inspire you to play on. It just assumes that you're going to continue playing. For example, your very first mission in the game is to bring a cup of tea to someone you've never met. Again, I have to stress that in 1993, this wasn't completely uncommon. There were fewer distractions back then, so even if the game said, hey, you just woke up in a barren town filled with only 3 people and a talking owl, you'd probably continue playing. But it's not 1993, it's 2023. And somehow I feel like KUDZU only mimics the surface elements of what Link's Awakening did. It feels like everything looks and sounds like an old Game Boy, but for some reason it just lacks the magic. For what it is though, it's fun enough. You look like a square-shaped sprite with a sword walking through a forest solving puzzles. Musically, it sounds like a Game Boy game, and maybe it's because of the GB Studio engine used to create the game, but the audio design lacks the classic sounds of a game from the 90s. There are practically no sound effects, the sword doesn't swipe, there's no explosion when you hit enemies, and since there are so few sound effects, you also miss the audio channel stealing that would normally happen in a Game Boy game. One of the things that makes the Game Boy a popular device for music creation even to this day is the way that it handled 4-channel audio. Since you can only play 4 sounds at a time and only 3 of them can play melodies, sound effects and other musical stings should cause the background music to cut out intermittently. Maybe the GB Studio engine is capable of this, but I didn't notice it in KUDZU. Now the music itself is fine. I won't be listening to it on Spotify, but for a non-Nintendo adventure, it's pretty much what you'd expect for a Game Boy game. Lastly, I should point out that it's still quite buggy. If you're playing the ROM only, this should be fine because the developer can push out an updated version. But if you're playing the physical cartridge and you run into a game-ending bug, that's it, you're toast. 2 minutes into my first session, I got stuck in the corner of the map just by opening up the pause menu. For some reason, closing the menu reset my location to an empty tile in the top left-hand corner with no escape. And speaking of the pause menu, it lets you read the names of items you haven't actually received yet. Then there's the boss animation. Originally, my problem was just that I didn't understand how to beat the boss, but I figured it out eventually. The real problem was that the boss is technically 4 sprites moving together, which means that any errors in the code lead to the boss breaking into separate sprites and making it, just a little bit harder to fight. But listen, if you appreciate retro stuff and you want to support a small team who think that an architecture project about plants leading to the developer's wife telling a story about her brother who cut down some Japanese arrowroot in the garden is a good idea for an adventure game, KUDZU is likely to be right up your vine. Subscribe for more, like the video if you haven't already, and comment what's the one Game Boy game that you would love to see reborn as a brand new physical cartridge like KUDZU. That's all for now. I've been NihongoGamer, and I'll see you real soon.